I'm looking for projects that solve a problem, that deliver a solution, and allow me to talk about that solution in a technical and non-technical capacity. That's what I'm looking for. Like,
it's not just I wrote this code, I used this technology, but no, here's the pain. Here's how I solved the pain. Here's how I fixed it. That's what makes a good project. It's what makes you stand out.
I've often said human beings eat with their eyes first. Make them hungry. And so if you're not giving them a project that actually looks appealing to kind of get them excited about something, it's not going to go the direction you want to go.
So many people put time and energy into learning and all the time and energy into preparing, but not enough energy into the way that you're going to actually get these interviews.
What's going on, everyone? We are back with another one. I am one of your hosts today. My name is Danny Thompson. I'm the director of technology at a company called This.Labs.
And I'm Leon Noel, manager director of engineering for a wonderful nonprofit called Resilient Coders and wonderful community member at 100 Devs.
Man, we got so flawless. It only took 7,000 episodes, but we've gotten so good at this. I love it. To be honest, we were kind of geeking out a little bit too much before the call where we probably should have hit record earlier on. But, that's how two besties hanging out, going on, just chilling, So we've talked about a couple things. Today's episode, I'm trying to get in the habit of laying out expectations. And to give y'all an idea of how our thought goes into this, none of this is really planned out. We know the topic. We know certain things that we want to hit. The path to hitting it, we don't predetermine. That's where the power of, editing comes into a certain degree. But the reality is, I feel like Leon and I are kind of so in tune here to where there really isn't much that's ever edited, if at all. So that's why y'all get the clips of us not so great as well as the great ones. But today, want to hit on several topics. One of them is, several of them are actually based off of a couple one-on-one calls that I've had as of recent. One of which in particular was with somebody from the 100 Devs program, which I think is really good because I think if people are listening that are either from 100 Devs or maybe from a different boot camp or maybe you just graduated college, this is really going to apply to you in that regard. And so it's going to be applying to technical interviews, approaches and how you can kind of go to it, but also strategies that work in other areas. And so this one, and kind of, I filled in Leon a little bit, but let me really go into the details with this one. So this one, I had a really great conversation with several people. For those that don't know, I do one-on-one calls. I try to do them here and there. And I have a cohort going on right now as we speak. It's actively going on. And of course, with the cohort, we're trying to have, for those that don't know, my cohort is a little different than a 100 Devs cohort. We're not a coding bootcamp. Essentially, our idea is, you have juniors that kind of pair together on a project. And so they're being guided by a professional software developer in the industry to build something that's actually worth talking about. And so for this cohort, it's the largest one that we've ever done in history, to be honest with you. It's to be honest, I still get nervous when I see the number of people because I'm like, how did we even get here? I feel like it's reached different levels. But I will share the projects that we're building in case someone's like, man, I want to build something and I don't know what to build. Now, here's the thing. These aren't weekend projects. This isn't a project where it's like, oh, you can knock this out with one YouTube tutorial. They're far more advanced than that. And that's because that's the idea. This is something that if you were to talk about in an interview, you'll be in a very confident position. If you were networking with a developer at a meetup, you would be in a very confident position. When I look at projects, I'm looking at 3 specific criteria. I'm pretty confident I've said this in previous podcasts, but in the off chance that I didn't, I'm looking for projects that solve a problem, that deliver a solution, and allow me to talk about that solution in a technical and non-technical capacity. That's what I'm looking for. If I need to talk technical with somebody, I can geek out. If it's somebody, let's say in HR, that doesn't know the difference between Java and React, or maybe they don't know the difference between .NET and PHP, you can talk with them in a way to where they totally understand and can be impressed by what it is that you built. So here are the 4 projects. Every cohort that we do, there's always a theme of 4 projects. And the idea is the teams decide what they're going to build. And so this cohort in particular, the teams are comprised between 6 and 10 junior devs on a team being guided by a professional. And some of the professionals we have are directors, engineering managers, senior developers. We have FANG level devs. We have some devs from Meta and Amazon and Blue Origin and Tesla, etc. Really great devs giving back. And of course, it's not paid. We don't charge anything. It's all volunteer ran, but that's kind of what it is that we do in Dallas, right? And so the 4 projects are a smart restaurant kitchen management system, right? So like it creates a digital ticket system that tracks orders from like the POS, like at the point of register to the kitchen. It does real-time inventory management that tracks and deducts ingredients. So for example, you could put like, let's say you have a chicken pasta dish. You would be able to say, whenever someone orders this, I know that they're going to be using this much pasta, this much chicken, et cetera, et cetera. Let's deduct that from our inventory in real time so that way we have a more accurate check. It has a predictive prep recommendation based on historical patterns. So maybe every Tuesday we know it's a little bit slower than the average Friday, right? So you may want to prep less on this Tuesday, and it will give recommendations based on that for the kitchen. A menu engineering dashboard, which shows profitability per dish. So that way the owners can kind of track that waste metrics and things like that. There's an integration for suppliers. So as we're keeping that inventory track at real time, it can go ahead and send an automatic reorder to the supplier to say, hey, we need more inventory on Tuesday for this delivery. So that way kind of you have a more accurate form of ordering besides, maybe just guessing. But there's a human feedback loop to where it's like, if someone knows like we actually have a big order coming on Wednesday next week, so we need more inventory on hand because of that, they can make that interjection.
I love this project. I think for so many folks that are transitioning into tech, it's going back to what you just said, like, what's the problem? What's the solution? And you can always think about problems that you had. If you were a server at a restaurant, the POS system was something you probably banged your head against every single evening. You probably hated it. You probably wished it was different. Well, guess what? You can write a program that fixes it. And then that gives you the real things that you're going to talk about in an interview, right? It's not just I wrote this code, I used this technology, but no, here's the pain. Here's how I solved the pain. Here's how I fixed it. That's what makes a good project. It's what makes you stand out. So I love that as like one of the big example products, because there's so many people that are transitioning from the service industry that have felt that pain, that could realize, like, build something beautiful, but also something that you could really talk about that get you through that kind of first phase. That's dope.
Oh yeah, and like the other thing is, oftentimes when I talk to juniors, they're like, I don't know what to build. It's like they think their projects need to cure cancer with code here. It's like that's not the case. Like you need to think about, and to me, a project also comprises of this, the delivery and how you explain it, right? And so if you can explain it in a meaningful way, I think that goes a long way, regardless of what industry it's touching or how complex it may be. There's tons of ways that you can implement it. The one thing that I would always advise on a project, though, is, and often an example that I give for this, was having a one-on-one with somebody who built a clone of Discord. And I was like, that's cool. That's very complicated. I don't know if it's going to have the wow factor you want with somebody in HR, for example, that may not necessarily even have experience with Discord. Who knows?
Yeah.
Like I have certain ideas of who could be potentially in HR, right? Like I always say, I create silhouettes of people for roles, right? And so it's like, there's certain characteristics that I look at, like HR or engineering manager or recruiter or business manager, right? Like each time there's a silhouette. Like obviously you can't just blanket statement everybody, but you can have an idea of where the majority may be as opposed to every single individual. And so I try to prepare myself for those conversations.
Yeah.
And so Discord might not necessarily be something in their tool basket, right? Like maybe every single person in HR isn't familiar with it, but regardless, he made a clone of Discord. And he tells me he spent almost 2 months building out the roles feature for his Discord thing. And I was like, that's really cool. Like he's geeking out over the complexity. I'm like, from a personal perspective, that's really cool that you did that. My question for you is, how many people that don't own or run their own Discord channel know the complexity or ins and outs of what that role feature really does? Do you feel like for 2 months that paid off dividends? Or would I like to allocate majority of that time for some of the bigger features that can be visually seen, whether you have familiarity and context with this feature or not? And he just froze. He's like, oh, wow, nobody's going to notice this.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's where I start looking at reward for time. And so when it comes to these projects, don't do that same thing to yourself.
And also the knowing your audience too. Not everyone that sees these projects are going to be super technical. And so does your project have to look good? Yeah. Because that's probably what a lot of the bulk of people will actually judge you on. And so if you're not a designer, link up with a designer or use templates, use something so that off the shelf, it doesn't look horrible. Because a lot of times the recruiters, the phone screens, They don't know that that roll feature took 2 months or any of the complexity behind it. They just know that it looks pretty, and that's going to help you get to the next phase. And so don't forget about that aspect of it too.
Yes. Yes. This is like, I've been saying this for years, and sometimes I feel like I'm screaming in a void because people don't get this. Finally, somebody that sees it the way I see it. Man, y'all know how many these folks don't know like mobile responsiveness. They just know like, oh, you told me this website. I decided to open up on my phone. It looks terrible. They're not giving you the benefit of the doubt to check out the desktop version, or vice versa. Maybe they're checking out the desktop version. You went mobile first, and the desktop doesn't look right. They're not giving you the benefit of the doubt to be like, let me check out what it looks like on the mobile screens, or let me open inspect element and change these screen sizes to see what this looks like. They're not doing that. And so I've often said human beings eat with their eyes first. Make them hungry. And so if you're not giving them a project that actually looks appealing to kind of get them excited about something, it's not going to go the direction you want to go. So I'll say the other three projects in a lot shorter version. Dental practice management platform. So it has treatment plan tracking, insurance verification systems, patient recall systems, a place where they can store like your x-rays and make sure that it's a secure place, supply inventory management, of course, because dental practices use stuff for like fillings and Novocaine and things like that.
Funny
But
enough,
also,
that was one of my like first big freelancing verticals was dental offices.
hell yeah.
And hated every second of it. So I understand the pain, and you hopefully solve some real pain with those projects.
Hopefully you're liking that episode, and we'll get back to the conversation in a second. But first, a word from our sponsors. Financial literacy is important, especially if you are in a position where you are changing careers and income brackets. More income can create larger financial issues if you don't budget correctly. So this episode is sponsored by Lucas Casares, certified financial planner and founder of Level Up Financial Planning, where he specializes in serving early and mid-career tech professionals to help you take your financial confidence to the next level.
Danny and I have helped thousands of people level up in tech, often going from 0 to 6 figures careers and seeing all kinds of mistakes. Level Up Financial Planning helps you gain clarity on all your finances. This includes prioritizing, managing employer stock, retirement planning, tax planning and preparation, college planning, and as a special deal for our listeners, you can get a complimentary meeting with Lucas. All you have to do is visit levelupfinancialplanning.com to find out more.
Lucas is awesome. A lot of people already checked it out from the previous episodes. Give it a check. Back to the episode. And so then there's a booking system for local contract services like a plumbing company, electrical company, HVAC company. And the idea is it would provide time slots for a customer. Let's say I'm trying to get a repair person to come to my house. I could book those time slots. I would explain what I feel like needs to be repaired. Like I could say like, oh, my air conditioning is not working correctly. It's making a rattling noise. You could theoretically use AI to kind of say, well, this could potentially be wrong. This could potentially be wrong. And it generates like a potential list of parts. I would cross-reference those parts with what I have in my inventory. And if it has it, fantastic. It tells the driver to make sure like they have this with them. If it does, it generates a list for that driver to take to the wholesaler to pick up those parts on the way there to ensure that they have the parts that are required for the repair in the vehicle. And bonus points if you are able to kind of sync that up to a calendar. So that way they could look at their daily calendar every day to be like, here's where all the appointments I have to go to for tomorrow, la da da da. The fourth application is a smart apartment building tenant portal. So it solves the issues related to tenant experiences and tenant retention for apartment complexes and companies. It creates a digital lease signing and renewal within the application, controls smart locks and automated access control for guests, et cetera, et cetera. Like this is kind of they're building one of 4 projects over the course of 6 weeks. And that's basically what we're doing for the cohort. But one thing on top of that we're doing is they have the requirement for coffee chats. And for those that don't know, a coffee chat would be at a bare minimum of a conversation that would take place over a cup of coffee. So 15 minutes, give or take. And essentially the idea is you're jumping on a call with somebody that may or may not be at a higher level than you, maybe be at a position that you're hoping to be at or whatever it may be. But the ultimate idea is to have a coffee chat where you have time to kind of learn about them. They have time to learn about you. And so it's like a great place to practice like your elevator pitch and things like that. And so for our cohort, this is the first time we've ever done it. And the night so on cohort kickoff night, when we kicked it off, we had 150 people in this call. And I remember the moment I said one of the prerequisites for this cohort was every single member has to have 5 coffee chats in order to stay in the program. Every single mouth dropped, including some of the leads. And what's funny is because like they knew about it and they didn't think I was serious about it. I was like, I was dead serious. And they dropped their mouth like, I can't. They were nervous. And some of these students are like, I've never had a coffee chat before. How does this go? And because we're using Discord for the cohort, I knew immediately they were going to start like messaging each other. And so the prerequisites for the coffee chats were you cannot message someone on Discord for a coffee chat. You must go through social media like LinkedIn, Twitter, etc., in order to get a coffee chat from somebody that's in the cohort. Now, you don't have to exclusively hold the coffee chat with somebody in the cohort. Maybe you got a coffee chat with somebody in a company or something like that. That counts too. But you have to have a bare minimum of 5. I remember day 3 of the cohort, I got tagged in a post. And his name, I'll even say his name because I think the dude's killing it right now. Israel Santana, he goes by Izzy. And he's been to the conference. He's been really active in trying to like make things happen for himself. And I remember he tweeted, I said, Danny, never in my life have I used LinkedIn in my calendar the way that I have in the last 18 hours. And by day 4 of the cohort, he had all 5 coffee chats accomplished.
Yeah, let's go.
And now we have, I think, 10 people in our 5 completed list. And I believe this is, it's the 7th day of the cohort right now. So it's like they speed ran it, but they were able to do something that they never thought possible before. And well, let me ask, do you have anything to add on coffee chats before I continue?
Yeah, I was going to say coffee chats are a big cornerstone of what we do at RC and 100 devs. So at RC, each of our students have to get 5 connections or 3 coffee chats. They switch every other week. So connections have to be, you've made a connection, someone's added you on LinkedIn, but you didn't meet that person on LinkedIn. Like you had to go to a meetup, a conference, something like that. That means to get 5, you're probably meeting like 10, 15 people because most people don't accept right away. That's 1 week. The next week, you have to turn those connections into coffee chats. And so it's 5 1 week, 3 the next, and you do that for the full 18 weeks of RC. 100 devs, we kind of push you to do the same thing as well. But the goal being that you're just by the end of the time that you've put into learning, you have this body of people that you can go back to and say, hey, we met X number of weeks ago. I'm on the hunt now for a job. Who should I talk to? And often that group of people that you go back to is the biggest source of leads that are going to help you on that job search. Even if it's just, oh, I heard this, or I talked to this person, it gets the ball rolling. And so many people put time and energy into learning and all the time and energy into preparing, but not enough energy into the way that you're going to actually get these interviews. And it's going to be your community. It's going to be your network. It's going to be the folks that you've connected with. And so these coffee chats get you building that network, but also just gets you comfortable talking to people, because guess what you're going to have to do during the interview process is talk to people about technical things, non-technical things. And if you're waiting until the very end to start having real meaningful conversations with people, it's already kind of late. So coffee chats don't even have to be about getting opportunities for the job. It's just like, how do you get comfortable talking about things, technical things with people that aren't in your specific lane? Has huge returns on your whole process.
And this kind of segues perfectly into what it is that we should have probably already been talking about now. But these one-on-ones that I had, one stuck out. Right. I have one-on-ones every single week. I can't remember a week where I didn't have one, but this week in particular, which was last week, I had 8. And one really stood out to me because they're a previous 100 devs member as well, and they went through it. And they really impressed me in certain areas. And so to give you an idea, I'll kind of give you the cliff notes. And so it was a really great conversation overall. Like, I think it was a good conversation. They've landed tons of interviews. They've gotten into so many interviews, and there were like a couple outliers. Before 100 devs, they never landed an interview in tech. Definitely the structure that's in 100 devs worked in their favor as far as like getting these conversations, interviews. None of the interviews that he ended up landing actually came from cold applying. Every single one came from referral or cold calling that person. Now, previous episodes, I'll always give this caveat. I will never tell you not to apply to jobs. I think you should. But if you're spending 8 hours a day applying to a job and it's not going in your favor, maybe knock it down to 4 and try the other 4 as far as networking and referrals and trying to build up leads.
I will tell you not to click apply and to just network your way.
I can't do it. Can't do it. No blanket statements. I get in trouble.
No, always apply, because the jobs close too quickly, right? You just have to do it. Just to be in that conversation, you have to do the applying. but it's just not going to work as well. And we see time and time again people that are on the podcast that are in the one-on-ones that are saying, hey, I got all this inbound because I was talking to people. The coffee chats mean things, folks. Like building these relationships mean things. Like this ability to have your resume skip the crap, skip the line, go right into the person that's actually hiring only happens if you're talking to people, you're building real connections. And you can do it. If you're listening to this right now, you can do it. Just go react to anything we put on Twitter, right? Danny's going to post about this episode on Twitter. I'm going to post about this episode on LinkedIn and Twitter. Just go into that post and say, I listened to it. I would love to connect with people. And you're going to connect with people. It's so easy. You just got to do it. And it's going to lead to so much good in your life in terms of opportunities, being able to break into tech, whatever you want to do. It's just about people. Put down the LeetCode for a second, just for a second. Build some relationships. You can do it in these posts today. You don't have to delay. Do it right now. It's going to change your life. And so I just want to scream it from the mountaintops because we see it time and time again. Yes, you can get lucky. You can click apply. Good things can happen. But we're talking about how we magnify our luck. How do we make better things happen? It's going to be through these relationships too. So please add even just a little bit. Even like Danny said, at least try it. At least try it and then see for yourself the return you can get from versus just being a clicker, a dirty clicker that all you do is click all day, and turning into someone that actually tries to build relationships that get you into the line, that get you into these interviews.
I'll even go as far as to say one extra thing here. It took me many years to realize this, and I've realized it now more than probably ever before. I think it's become the activity of one's calendar can determine their level of success. And one thing that I've noticed with very, very successful people, including people that I interact with on like a daily basis, is just the sheer level of activity on the calendar. Yeah. If you're trying to break into tech and you look at your calendar for like the last quarter and you only have like 0 or 1 coffee chats or conversations with people, that's probably not a really successful calendar. And then now if you look at maybe someone on the opposite end of things where they have 40 or 50 things on their calendar, they're probably having a lot more activity go in the right direction compared to that person that only had 1 thing on their calendar. Yeah. So that's something that I would be looking at especially if you're trying to break in.
And it's not even like big brain stuff too. I'm going to shout out my ED at Resilient Coders, Ayana. We had a one-on-one yesterday and she was like, I'm just taking the beginning of my week to reach out to 10 people. Just to reach out. How you doing? How's life been? I don't need anything from you. I just want to check in and see how you're doing. I thought of you. You've been important to me in my life. Like, I want to see where you're at. And the return that she gets on 10 messages a week in terms of building those relationships, meeting people where they're at, being at the right time to be helpful to them, to be in service of them, so that when they need something from them too, they just have a relationship. And so you don't need to be doing like these big, like fanciful things. It's just checking in on people. It's just how you doing? Like, how's life? Like, it doesn't have to be more than this. And when you're first building out these connections, just go to a meetup and then follow up with those people. And then a month later, send that message. Hey, the conversation we had at that meetup, I think about it a lot. It was important to me. Hope your week's going well. It's not these like big brain activities. It's just, how do you build the relationships? How do you keep them on your calendar? I think if you I totally agree with the calendar thing. I love showing my students my calendar because they're just like, their jaws drop and they're like, oh, that's how you do it. Yeah, that's how I do it. Like, here are all the calls, here are all the people I'm talking to, here are all the relationships, here are all the places I am. Like, the things I'm telling you to do, I actually do. And you can see it on the calendar. But I think when you're kind of newer to it, it doesn't have to be this big production. Go to a meetup, make a few quality connections, and then follow up consistently with them. Add them to your calendar, add a coffee chat to the calendar so you can actually follow up with it. It doesn't have to be something huge. Take those steps, get the wheels turning, and over time, you'll be in a really good spot.
Yeah, I totally agree. And what I would say here is that person, every relationship that they kind of created, it came from networking. They weren't relationships that they had previously. They felt that there were times when they got to talk about themselves, they thrived in those conversations. So like interview number 1, they killed it, knocked it out of the park. Every single time they pretty much got moved on to progressing to interview number 2. And then everything else fell apart, especially when given technical assessments. And with technical interviews, they bombed it, and that's where they were pushed out essentially, or they would be given common ejections. And we've addressed some in the past, but for sure, it's like, oh, we're looking for somebody with more experience, or they would hear like, oh, you don't have a degree. We're looking for somebody with a degree. Even further emphasize this individual in particular. They even started a meetup group in their area, and I was like, you've definitely gone above and beyond as far as like the networking aspect. But when it came to the technical, right? Like they're like, I'm bombing it. So what do I do? And I looked at him. I'm like, you just literally identified the problem.
Yeah.
And you came to me. Like, what did you think I was going to tell you? Like, don't worry about it, dude. They don't know what they're talking about. Just keep going. No, you've identified your problem.
Yeah.
And I was like, I know 100 devs. I know for a fact he tells y'all to study the technical abilities. And so like, what happened with the elite coding, Anki, and all that good stuff? And he was like, I was doing it for a while. I stopped so I could focus on this other stuff. But now I'm gonna pick it back up. So like you haven't picked it up yet, even though you've already identified after multiple. I mean, we're talking about, he said roughly 40 interviews. So it's like, you don't have a problem landing in interview number 1, but by 40, you weren't like, there got to be something to this LeetCode thing.
I think there's a lot there to unpack, right?
Yeah.
One, it's hard when you're in it to realize what you're messing up. And so it's why I think community is so important. Doing a one-on-one with Danny, coming to, we run huddles on Discord, on the 100 Devs Discord all the time, typically every Tuesday and Friday, where people can come and say this exact thing, like, hey, this happened. And you have people that can help you pick apart, like the thing that might be very obvious to us right now on this call, you might not be able to see because you're just too in it. And so sometimes you need that outside perspective to like snap you into the way of doing something. But the beautiful thing about going into all these interviews is that you start to get feedback, right? You start to see like, oh, I can get to this stage, but I can't get past it. At that point, you have to be analytical of what's happening, right? Don't be critical, just analytical of like, all right, I've gotten to the stage where I have to do the LeetCode and it doesn't go well. Well, now it's time to fix that portion of your experience. And there are really good things you can do to fix that portion of the interview process. We talk a lot about prep. We talk a lot about the different strategies to get ready for technical interviews, but you then have to put in that work to fill that gap. So identify the gap either through community, one-on-ones, outside perspective, and then put a game plan together to actually go after it. I am also always fearful when I hear those types of numbers. We use a euphemism at 100 Devs called 1 in 60, meaning that you probably have to go through up to 60 interviews to get a job. That always blows people's minds. So like, what do you mean 60? I'm like, yeah, it's 1 out of 60. If you're doing 5 to 10 interviews and it didn't go well, those are rookie numbers, right? It's not how we play the game. We play the game and it's about 60. And we always have some folks in the community that are like number 56 and then they get the job and they're like, you really did mean 1 out of 60. So that's what we do it for. When you're at 40 and you're hearing things like, we were looking for somebody with more experience or those types of words, there's a mismatch in how you're selling yourself. Yes. If you have quite a few of those, and so that mismatch, you then also have to identify. It's either the jobs you're applying to, it's the area that you're in. Like this happens a lot with people that are like in the Bay Area and they're applying to like Meta, like all the big companies. There's just different processes. And so you have to be careful when you start hearing that type of feedback, because there might be something else that you're doing in this process that we have to identify too.
I will take this a step further. And the way that I've quantified this, there are certain objections that tell me something different than what the words say. And so for me, oftentimes, not always, I'll never say something 100%, but it's pretty high up there, where if someone says, we were looking for someone with more experience, that doesn't necessarily mean years of experience as much as it means we've had some realistic objections and you haven't solved any of them.
Yes.
You have not alleviated the concern that we had when we interviewed you. We knew you were entry level and we were willing to take a chance if you could sell us on it. I don't feel like you've sold us on this yet. You haven't shown us enough that makes us willing to downgrade this role for you. That's often what I hear.
And it's when it comes status because they liked you. They liked that you knocked it out of the park on the behavioral, you knocked it out of the park on the phone screen. They like you. You don't get to that round if they don't like you. And so they liked you. They saw a spark. There was something they were interested in. And then the way that you were communicating your experience, your skill set didn't deliver, right? Like it didn't get across the plate. Because you got to think about why. what are you talking about? A lot of people snitch on themselves in interviews and they don't realize it.
Mm-hmm.
They don't hype the projects that they worked on. If you're in the cohort and you spent 6 weeks on a project and then you go into the interview like, well, there's a small team of people and we did some code and it did this thing, it had this feature. Instead of being like, we built this POS system that solved the major pain point of every single person in the service industry. Everyone that now uses this application is they're going to have a way better life, right? Like there's just different ways that you can carry yourself in an interview that makes people feel confident in the answers that you're giving. And the hard thing is that after you've done 40, you're kind of beat down a little bit. You start to internalize, maybe I'm not this person. Maybe I don't have the skills that I say I have, but it's the exact opposite kind of energy you need at that point in time. No, the things I've built, the things I've done can solve your problems. I solved them before. I want to solve them for this org too. And you got to carry that momentum, carry that energy. And if you're not, people pick up on it and you get the, oh, we're looking for someone with more experience line.
Oh yeah. And the funny thing with this person in particular is like, they only heard that after they bombed the technical interview. So it's like, it's pretty obvious why you're hearing that at that point, right? Or the other objection they constantly heard was, we were looking for somebody with a degree. Well, they were looking for the same person in interview number 1, where you thrived, as you say. But when you started showing your lack of ability and understanding, that's when they're like, there's going to be a lot more hand-holding here.
Yeah.
And let me kind of even explain this one point. When it comes to the degree, they don't really, I'd say the vast majority, not all, but the vast majority of companies, when they look for that degree criteria, it's not because that piece of paper really just means that much to them as much as it is, they know if somebody has a degree, they're at this level of skill. And based on that, they know it's going to take X amount of time for them to onboard in a meaningful way to be valuable to the code base at a certain time. That's how they've figured that process out. So yeah, when you hear that no degree thing, that's exactly what they're looking for. How is that counteracting that? Like, are you going to be at the same onboarding, or is it going to take them longer? Is it going to take them shorter? That's something that they're looking for. And so it's up to you to dispel those concerns. Like that job description, they're looking for certain things. How are you addressing that? When you get into the technical side of things, you have to prove your technical ability. Like, and I even told this person on the one-on-one, like, it serves you no purpose to be halfway done with your skill set and be like, eventually someone's going to fall in love with me. It's like, what's the point of getting an interview if you don't have the technical skills to back it up? You have to have it. And the thing that I've always said when it comes to like HackerRank and LeetCoding assessments, for me, there are platforms that I prefer over the others. But when it comes to how some of these platforms monetize, how does HackerRank really monetize? They make assessments for companies to test people on. Why wouldn't you use the platform that they're testing people on? Same thing with LeetCode. They have a whole aspect where they make assessments for enterprise level organizations, and they have the whole learning aspect, right, where they teach you. Why wouldn't you use those platforms when employers are using them? To use other platforms, like I have preferences as far as like the user experience that I like better, but to not even touch those other platforms at all to understand where the questions are coming from seems very disadvantaging to me. But the other thing that I even asked them, right, like you went through all these technical interviews, did you audit it? Like after you bombed it, did you go research those questions and learn how to do it? For a lot of them, they didn't. I would have personally been doing that. But for the ones that he did do, I asked like, when you researched it and looked it up, where was the skill level at? It was pretty much where I've always believed them to be. It's either at the easy or medium level. Very rarely, outside of one, did it go to the highest level of the medium level to almost the beginning stages of the hard level. Generally speaking, for the junior level, entry level roles, maybe even mid level, that's kind of where those questions are going to come from. Yeah. They're not asking you all this other crazy complex stuff. So if you just kind of really grind out that easy and medium section, you're pretty good for the most part. And so I think people are just daunted at the idea of having to learn something extra. And because social media has also made it like, well, learning this is not going to help you on the job. To a certain degree, we can all have our arguments on that. But the reality is, if I know I'm in a market where they're going to be hiring for that and that's part of the process, I would be a fool to be unprepared for that.
It's sad because it's so consistent, right? Like there are some things that you can't plan for, but those data structures and algorithms ain't changing anytime soon. They've been the same for a while. Like they're not going to change anytime soon. So the time and energy you put into it is not something that's going to disappear. Like it's a worthwhile investment because it's consistent, and not every company cares about them, but enough do that you should care about them too, right? And so, especially if you're now in a market that it seems like they care about it. Not, I think it's actually, to me, kind of city by city what I see in terms of, is it just like raw, like technical questions and explain your project versus like, let's just do a LeetCode. It kind of varies by area, but it seems like you're in a spot where they really care about these technical questions. And now it's on you to go back and do it. And you did 100 times. You should be doing this already. You should be starting for folks, and just to be like a path for folks that I like to put people on. Start with Code Wars. 8 Qs, level up. It's the very basic stuff. It's just like, how to use variables, functions, how do you do loops, conditionals, and then you'll get to 7 Qs, and then you'll get to 6 Qs. Once you're on 6 Qs, you're kind of solving the problems that you would see in a technical interview. Stop Code Wars, go to LeetCode. You start with LeetCode Easies. Now, you can just stay on LeetCode, but I'm a big fan of NeetCode. I think NeetCode is amazing. They do really good videos for the top, I think 75 questions, right? You could just go through each of those videos, those tutorials, completely free. Their website's dope too. You'll walk away with all the things that you need to know how to do to solve those basic LeetCodes. That could be enough. You want to throw some other data structures, algorithm prep in there. Front-End Masters has a completely free data structures and algorithms course. They have an original one in JavaScript, and they have one with Primogen that's in TypeScript. Both phenomenal courses. That's all you need. You do your Code Wars to start off with, get the ball rolling, do NeetCode and that Front-End Masters course. You have enough information to be ready for the interviews. And then it's just about putting it into some sort of spaced repetition system so you don't forget it. Like I always, of course, talk about Anki or Enki, right? If you do that and you just make it a small part of your day, 30 minutes to an hour each day, you're prepared. And it's just about carving off that time. It's about making that part of your routine. I also like to add in behavioral questions, technical questions that aren't like LeetCode style questions. And I like to make sure that you're still doing your networking and coffee chats. It's an hour block of time a day. If you can figure out how to do that consistently, you're prepared for all your interviews.
Yeah, my strategy is very similar to that. Oftentimes, when it comes to like technical prep, like if I were to if I knew I was going to hit the job market or something like that, I would easily be grinding it for about 6 to 8 weeks. That's pretty much all you need to really feel comfortable. Now, I'll admit I have a lot of history with DSA. I've been using it for years, especially for interviews. I've only ever had one interview not utilize it. Every other interview for every other company I've worked for has always involved with it. But now on the flip side of the coin, I've met people that have never done a DSA interview. It really depends on your market. It really depends where you're located. If you're in the US, like for example, it seems like in Europe, almost nobody does any DSA related questions for interviews. In the US, there's a lot more prevalence in that regard, especially if you're going like enterprise. If you're going more maybe on the startup side, maybe they're doing something completely different. It just really depends. With that being said, one of the biggest tips that I'll ever give somebody doing a DSA, like if you're doing whiteboarding or if you're in a call and they're like observing you build something or something like that, if you get a DSA question and you know that question, because really there's only like 14 patterns, right? Like you learn those 14 patterns, you're good. But if you know that question, man, you better act like you don't know that question. Like some of y'all are so confident, oh, I know this, and you answered it in no time. I was like, oh, you knew it? Let me give you another one. They want to see you work through it. Now, obviously, I wouldn't just go up to everybody and be like, always pretend, but talk through the process. Let them know how you're solving it. Don't just rush through it to get the solution. The thing with DSA questions, it's not as much about the accurate answer as it is about understanding how you approach a problem and think through it. That's what they really need to know. And so if you don't vocalize it, if you don't show them the steps, if you don't talk through and walk through it, they only have the right answer to go off of.
Yeah.
But I can tell you right now from firsthand experience, there have been DSA interviews where I did not perform at my best. But because I vocalized it, because I explained the steps that I was utilizing, I got to the next stage of those interviews. Happened multiple times. And then I could tell you there have been times where I've completely like killed my DSA interview, didn't get the next interview. It's flip side, right? There's a million things that can go into that factor. But I will say that if you are not vocalizing it, you're hurting a lot of opportunities right there. So don't just speed through it, think through it, speak through it, all that good stuff. It's extremely valuable.
It's just the idea, like people fundamentally don't understand, I think, that it's about the communication collaboration. It's about the thought process just as much as it is about the actual solution. Not every company values this, but a lot of companies, they're trying to figure out, can you solve the problems? And do I want to work with you for the next 2 years to solve these problems? And a lot of companies have their employees vote, like whether or not it's a hire, strongly hire, don't hire. And so you can influence that vote by the way that you go about the interview. It's not just about the solution. And so when you get a problem that you know how to 360 slam dunk about the Vince Carter, you should slow down. Take time to get to know the person that's interviewing you. Ask good questions. Bring them into solving it. Show them that you can think well and reason through problems. So at the end, not only do they see that you can solve the problem, but they now know more about you know more about them. They're going to vote strongly to go on to the next round. And you have stuff that you can follow up with them afterwards, right? You're playing two games.
The other strategy I would utilize in technical interviews, honestly, if you're in an interview where there's a person that maybe they're having you build something, ask questions. I would be asking them all kinds of questions. Like they're there for that reason. And to be honest, that's another way to gauge, where your skill set is. I would be asking, like, are they looking for a certain edge case scenario here? Or is my assumptions of this accurate? In my opinion, when it comes to that technical interview, there is no wrong question. But also be in mind, like, they're also gauging the questions that you ask and the quality of that question that you ask. So if you ask something very foolish, like, should I make a variable? It's like, what are we talking about here? But then if you say like, hey, I see this, like, give an example of like two sum here. Like I see this two sum. I'm assuming that these are two numeric values. Would that be accurate, or should I make an assumption that maybe a variable will be passed in here that could break something? Or should I be thinking about edge cases where what if somebody puts in a string? Should I be creating a solution that assumes that as well, and maybe putting error protection there? If the answer for that is no, I can just assume every value will be a number. That's a great question to ask in that scenario.
We use something called PrEP. I think I mentioned it once before in the podcast. Parameters, returns, examples, pseudocode. Your technical interview should walk through that. Parameters, what's coming into what I'm building, return, what do you want me to spit out, examples, so that we're keeping each other honest. Especially if you know how to solve the problem, you know you're going to solve it quickly. Hey, if all these test cases pass, we solved the problem, right? That way, when you do solve it quickly, they don't switch it up and be like, oh, actually, I wanted to do these 5 other things. No. We have the examples. We agreed, like, that's what we're going to do. And then pseudocode. Before you run into actually typing out the actual code, talk through in a high-level overview, plain language. What are we doing? Am I solving it right? Because at this point, your interviewer will probably give you some hints if you're really off. A lot of times companies instruct their interviewers to give you hints at this phase. And that way, before you start getting your fingers on the keyboard where you're going, and then you actually solve the problem. Now you've been communicating, you've been collaborating, you have a really good direction, you understand all the bits and bobs that are going to go in, and you can solve the problem more effectively. So I think for a lot of folks that if they're getting ready for technical interviews, having a system that you're following, like PrEP, and you do it for every single code word, every single LeetCode, you do it, record yourself doing your LeetCodes, like film yourself, see what you look like. Because a lot of you do this. You got to stop that. You got to be looking at the camera, talking, especially if you know you're doing a lot of interviewing remotely. Get comfortable talking to the camera, get comfortable communicating the ideas that are on your text editor, right? Like you got to practice these things or else you just come across not so great in an interview. And so these are all things that you can practice and add to it on top of just like the technical piece too.
That's a good place to stop. And let's do a Ask Danny and Leon. We got this question here. So this question says, how do you avoid spreading yourself too thin? On a daily basis, I aim to network, work on my big project, freelance, still looking for my first client, do flashcards, do coding challenges. I wake up at 5:30 and I go to sleep at 9 and work a full-time job from 9 to 5. Any tips? Thank you in advance. I look forward to hearing from you. I want to offer my help. If there's any assistance, please let me know, et cetera, et cetera. First and foremost, I want to thank you for releasing weekly episodes and discussing topics for a lot of people, including myself, that can resonate with it. Thank you so much for the email.
What do you want in life? What do you want for yourself? What do you want for your family? What do you want? Like, what do you want? A lot of what we want can come down to what we prioritize. And I want a lot of good things in my life, and I'm willing to do a lot of stuff to make them happen. But I don't see myself as spreading myself thin. I see myself as trying to go after the things that I want to accomplish. And the way I do that is by having a very disciplined schedule, making sure I stick to my calendar, make sure I'm sticking to early wake up times, late hours, unfortunately at night to get it. But I know what my why is. I know what I'm fighting for. I know what I want to accomplish for myself, for my community, for my loved ones. And once I had that why, everything became a lot easier. If I didn't have that why, I wouldn't know how to prioritize it, and I would just let things slip. But for me, I figure out what I want to get done, and then what are the steps I need to make that happen. And then I put blocks of time on my calendar. I live and breathe by my calendar. If it's not on my calendar, it does not exist. It will not happen. I have ADHD. If it's not on the calendar, boop, in out one ear, out the other. I'll never think of it again. And so for me, I do every Sunday, I block out my week, like what I need to get done that entire week. Every night before I go to bed, I block out the 3 key things I need to get done the next day. I've tried all the note-taking systems in the world. Nothing of it works. It's just those 3 things, must do or die, have to get done. They get done. And then I block off all my other things on my calendar. So I have time for Anki. I have time for my personal projects. I get to some bad, I've told Danny this offline. I get to some bad weeks where I put bathroom break on my calendar, because I know if I don't put it on the calendar, I'm just going to try and squeeze in another meeting to like make it happen. And so for me, it's about understanding what I want, why I'm willing to do it, then making sure I have a really robust calendar and asking myself those kind of specific questions. If you are trying to balance all the stuff on the job search, it's the same idea. Understanding that there are probably times in your day that are going to be better for certain tasks. A lot of the rote kind of repetitive stuff is typically better for most folks in the morning. So waking up a little bit earlier is a good idea to maybe get that stuff done. Maybe saving the more creative stuff for the afternoons, evenings. And then the other thing too is that you should also be scheduling recharge time. Maybe not scheduling, but you need to have it as part of it, right? You should either be working hard or recharging hard. There's no in between, especially when you have a big, heavy, like amount of work you want to get done. Either you're studying or you're not. Don't exist in that gray area. Where most of my students fail is they feel bad about playing Fortnite, so they don't play Fortnite, but they're also not studying. They kind of just exist in this and they get stuck there. Either work hard, recharge hard, have a good game plan. Don't go into your weeks like an accident. Don't go into your day like an accident. Use a calendar and stick to it. And the world's yours.
I can tell you right now, Leon and I are pretty much on identical wavelengths. Like, a lot of the advice that we often give is very similar. And I will say, you've had the circumstances in your life your entire life. When you've worked hard, or not even worked hard, but you worked what you thought at that time was hard, you still had those same circumstances. So in order to change the circumstances of your life and your situation as a whole, it takes an ungodly amount of work and effort in order to change those circumstances. And for a lot of people that give advice, unfortunately, they've grown up in a position where maybe they didn't have to work hard or as hard to change circumstances because they already lived in those circumstances that they were going to exist in. And so to completely change something, it's going to take effort. And that's maybe not the most social media friendly answer. I know people don't like it when you kind of put it in that that way, but there's no way on God's green earth would I have ever been able to change the circumstances of my life unless I just push myself in a way that I never pushed myself before. Because as of right now, I'm the most successful person in my family's history. That says a lot, because between me and the next member of my family, there's a massive, massive gap. To give you an idea, my younger brother, he just turned 18 years old, and he's still, living in mom's home and all the good stuff, which, to be honest, is expected in this economy, right? But he was just gaming all day, and I remember giving him a call. He lives in Michigan. I was like, "Hey, man, like, you haven't got a job, like, you're not contributing yet or anything, like, you're not in school anymore, like, you're just sitting at the house gaming. Like, what are we gonna do?" He's like, "Oh, I tried. Nobody gives me a call." And I'm like, "What do you mean you tried? Like, what did you do?" "Oh, I called a couple places." Like, "Well, we got to go past a couple." And we had one conversation, and I even said, like, "Well, what does your resume look like?" He's like, "What's a? I don't have a resume." I was like, "How are you trying to get a job? You ain't got a resume?" And it just like light bulb hit. Like, I just never thought that I had to get a resume. And I'm so proud of him. He, put in the effort, and he got a job working at a fast food place. But it's the first job he's ever had in his life, right? Like, so it's like, if someone can kind of venture out and do that, it took him doing something outside of his norm in order to get that, like cold calling, walking up to places. He dropped his resume off at like 75 places apparently, and this one place, they were so impressed with his resume because he put like all the volunteer stuff that he's been doing and school stuff, and they were like, "You know what, we're gonna take a chance on you, let's bring you in." Now some of y'all might be like, "What's faster?" It's like, yeah, but it's something. How many people are out there that don't have a single opportunity, but they haven't done anything to adjust or adapt to what needs to be there? And so You want to change the circumstance of your life, you got to do something that's outside of the normal lane that you've been traveling in. Is it comfortable? Hell no. And I wish it was. I really wish it was. I wish I could tell you that, man, if you just have positive thoughts, the world's going to change for you. But the reality is that's not the case. And so if you want to change your circumstances, if you want your family to live in a different circumstance, if you want your mom to be able to ride the car in the car instead of on the bus, that's going to take some extraordinary measures in order to make that happen. If you just thought like, hey, you know what? I've got a goal and the universe is going to allow me, hate to break it to you, not the case, right? I can tell you right now, there's been a vast majority of times where I thought I was going to kill it doing one thing and I absolutely fell on my face. But you know what? Fail, pivot, grow. I've said this for years and I'll continue to say it. Fail where you need to fail, because when you fail, it means either you pushed your idea too far or you didn't push it far enough, but you gained a lot of information in that process. Pivot to where you need to be. Maybe you need to pull back the idea or push it forward some more and then grow in that new environment. Or maybe you just need to do a complete pivot. Like, hey, lane number 1 didn't work. Now we're on lane number 2. Lane number 317 failed. I'm on 318. Whatever that lane number is, that's fine. But it's going to take extraordinary measures to change your circumstances. Otherwise, you're just going to be in the exact same circumstance you were the entirety of the time. Does this mean kill yourself? No. But does this mean you're not going to have to put in a lot of sweat in order to get in there and then feel a lot of pain? I wish I had a different answer for you in that regard, but it's a very painful process to make something amazing happen. And I can tell you right now, once you get success, it doesn't stay that way, unfortunately. There's a lot of painful moments along that path as well. And to even put that into perspective, during the pandemic, a lot of people were, especially on social media, were very against the idea of like working hard. Like, you shouldn't have to tell people to work hard and la. And anytime I would mention on social media, I'd have a massive amount of hateful comments. And I was like, completely understand the social media aspect to it. Some of the people that are saying this are people that probably never had to change their circumstances. They were kind of born into that. Like, a lot of them had parents that were engineers or parents that were higher up as doctors and lawyers. And so they had all the resources available to them, where they weren't in a situation where you had to even explain to a family member what a 401k is. Because I remember telling my mom, hey, I got a 401k. And her exact response was, what are you, gambling? Like, there's no financial literacy there. So it's like, when you don't have that support system that a lot of people even talk about friendly in their home, and you don't have that being told to you on a regular basis, there's a whole level of education that you have to go through just to even be at an equal playing field, just to have the conversation. I always say learning how to code isn't the goal. It's the prerequisite to enter the conversation. This is the same thing in this, like, to change your circumstances. There are some things that you need as a prerequisite to even have that conversation. And so I would tell you, from that perspective alone, it's painful, but damn, is it worth it, dude? Like,
Oh yeah.
there are times right now, I could tell you, like, my hourly rate is what I used to make in 2 days. And it blows my mind at times. Like, it completely blows my mind. But 2 days,
Yeah.
like, there were many weeks, many years where I was literally making 240 a week, 200 a week, and didn't know any better. Didn't know anything about it because I didn't grow up around financial information. You make it an hour now. It's like, damn, why didn't I know this before? So hopefully that answers that question. It's been real. It's been fun. You could have been anywhere in the world. You decided to hang out with us. Hopefully you got value for it. I genuinely appreciate all y'all. Thank you. See you on the next.
Peace, everybody.
Bye, everybody.